This afternoon, I am in Dallas talking with Gail M Daly, who is the retired director of the Underwood Law Library of Southern Methodist University's Dedman School of Law. In fact, Gail, we are sitting in a conference room here in the library, and I appreciate your willingness to come talk with me on camera, as I like to call these sessions, and to also you and the new director offer me the use of this fine facility in which to do these.
Good.
Mm-hmm. I should also mention that prior to your retirement, because you're retired, you held the title of Associate Dean for Library and Technology, and of course were also an Associate Professor of Law. Okay.
Yes.
Well, with that by way of general introduction, let me ask, as is the custom, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself as a real person, a little bit about your life perhaps today, and maybe even when you were younger.
I was born and raised in Keego Harbor, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
which is right outside of Pontiac, which is about 20 miles from Detroit. I think I must have been 8 or 10 years old before it occurred to me that everyone's father didn't work for an automobile company, because everyone I knew worked for the auto companies. And it was a great place to grow up because we were in walking distance of something like 6 or 8 lakes, best swimming lake in the country. My parents would be arrested today because we used to go down to the public beach every day, no lifeguard, no nothing, stay there too long, get a sunburn. It was just a wonderful childhood.
That's right.
And
Child Protective Services
That's
would
right.
be on their case
That's right.
fast.
That's right. And my parents always told us that we were so lucky. There were 4 of us, older brother, older sister, and younger brother, that we were so lucky that we lived in Michigan, that had one of the very best state universities in the country.
Well, that's true from
And-
what I understand.
Yes. And that we were all supposed to work very hard so that we could all get into the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And we were supposed to work hard enough that we could get a Regent scholarship, which was full tuition. And we all did.
Mm-hmm.
So that was nice.
Well, now you really met your part of the obligation.
Yes, we
in
did.
that
I think I did my
department.
part of that
no,
bargain.
No student debt, I hope, as
That's
a
right.
result.
So
Good.
it worked out beautifully.
Well, that's nice. So you grew up in Michigan.
Mhm.
Since then, you've, of course, been down here. Anything in between that
Yes.
you want to mention?
Went to Michigan, got my bachelor's in Michigan, stayed an extra year to get my master's in library science,
Mm-hmm.
because I had grown up, we didn't have television until I was probably in junior high. So the library was the most important thing for us. We used to ride up on our bicycles. We didn't have baskets on the bikes, so we'd have to balance shopping bags on the handlebars on either side with all the books in them, get up to the library. And we would go up 2, 3, 4 times a week.
Uh-huh.
We always had to take the dog with us because dogs weren't supposed to be penned up then. So in between us and the library, there were all these vicious dogs, and my dog could beat up any dog. So we'd take the dog with
So
us,
the dog
bicycle
was
up there.
protection.
Yes,
Mhm.
leave our bikes, stay in the library, and get a whole bunch of new books and bring them home. So that's why, and I was convinced that reading is what made us all successful, my brothers and my sister and I. And it worked out, actually. During orientation at the University of Michigan, before my freshman year, they give you a bunch of tests, Minnesota multiphasic test and all sorts of tests.
Mhm.
And one of them was a reading comprehension test. And when I met with the counselor, he said, "Wow, you've scored in the top 5 of anybody who's ever scored." And he said, "Are you related to Sheila Murphy?" And I said, "Yes, that's my sister." He said, "Well, she's in the 5 too." And I think it's because we had nothing to do but read.
Mhm.
And that's all we did growing up. And so I wanted to be a librarian so that other children, I could encourage them to love to read as much as I did. And I thought that was the gateway to everything.
Mm-hmm. So you somehow missed out on all those perfectly wretched children's TV programs.
Yes, they did.
And learned something that actually helped you.
Oh, yeah, and went through, like all the Wizard of Oz books. I remember our library had all but 2 of the Wizard of Oz books.
Mhm.
And when I got up to the University of Michigan, the library school had a little library of children's books for people who wanted to be a children's librarian, and they had those 2 Wizard of Oz books that I'd missed. So my first semester at Michigan, I read the other 2 Wizard of Oz books. I didn't care if I was 18 years old, didn't bother me.
Well, it's a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Who watches Harry Potter these days?
That's right.
People like myself.
Well, I
And
remember
I'm not 18
when the Harry Potter
even.
books came out, on the law faculty we would talk about them.
Yeah.
We'd all get excited, and these are law
Mhm.
professors reading Harry
Yeah.
Potter. So you're never too young to be a kid at heart.
You know, and of course, we're talking, it's November of 2015 right now for our viewers. And it's about ready to, we're about ready to get another Star Wars
Yes.
movie. And it's all sorts of activity, hype and so
Oh
on.
yeah.
You go into any store and there are all these Star Wars things for sale.
Now
It's
myself,
like,
I've always been a Trekkie rather than a Star Wars person, but I can do Star Wars too.
well, maybe the other will come along too and you can do both.
So I stayed for an extra year to get my library science degree.
Mhm.
And my first job was the year my husband and I were married, 1969. I was a school librarian at the same school system I had grown up in.
Mhm.
And it was a new elementary school. The whole school was built around the open library. It was just beautiful.
Oh, I remember that concept,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it was so much fun, getting the kids to come in and telling them stories. It was what I'd always planned to do all my life.
Mhm.
And then 1 year after we were married, my husband's business transferred him to Minnesota.
Oh, so that's why you start off as a school librarian, and then suddenly you're not only a librarian, but you have moved to what some of our colleagues may think of as the dark side. You're working in a law library at the University of Minnesota.
Well, and it's odd how our best laid plans, just never work out the way you think. I got to Minnesota, and it was like the middle of September. School had already started.
Uh-huh.
So there are no openings for a school librarian. Plus, you had to get like 2 credits in Minnesota history, and
Oh.
2 credits in some kind of teaching subject they wanted you to take. So I thought, okay, I'll do those during the year. I'll do it in night school or something.
Mhm.
But I can't just sit home for a year until the next school year. And my husband was working on the University of Minnesota campus. So I went to HR hoping to get a secretary's job because I could type like a fiend, like 100 words a minute.
Mhm.
And when after I took the typing test, the counselor in the Human Resources Department said, "Why are you applying for a secretary's job? There's a librarian opening in the law school for a serials cataloger." I thought, ew, worst thing in the world. I didn't like cataloging in library school. I used to volunteer in the first 5 minutes of class and then sit at the back and work a crossword puzzle.
Figured
So-
that you've been called on
That's
for
right.
that day.
But I thought, well, it's not so bad, and it paid better. So I went over to the law school. I interviewed with Phyllis Marion, who is the head of technical services.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And she and her staff hired me because the other people they hired, you might want to edit this out. The other people they interviewed the other women all looked like they got their hair done every week, and I didn't. So they liked me better. So that's how I got hired.
Well, maybe I'll leave this in because the probability is you haven't named anybody except
No.
Phyllis, and I know
Right.
she wasn't the one. So
No. So that's how I got my job there, and I started as a serials cataloger, thinking I'll do this for a few months, then get my teaching certificate, and I just stayed there for 19 years.
yeah. Well, I always like to ask if anyone played a role in recruiting you into the field, and it sounds like quite the contrary. If you'd gone to the hair place,
That's right.
you
I
wouldn't have
be
been
here.
recruited into the force.
Right.
But seriously, did anyone play a role in this decision other than Phyllis saying, we have a job offer for you?
No, I think that what played a role in my staying in law librarianship were 2 people, Phyllis Marion and Kathy Price.
Okay.
I'm not sure, if I would have stayed in law libraries or gone on to something else until Kathy became director.
Mm-hmm.
And as Kathy became director, Phyllis went on to William Mitchell to get her law degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved up to head of tech services, and then when Kathy went to the provost's office for a year, I was acting director.
Uh-huh.
And during that time, we hired some new reference librarians. And Kathy asked me, what are they like? I said, they're all guys. Some of them, I think, just didn't like law school or didn't like being a lawyer, and they decided this is a woman's profession and they can be in it. And Kathy said, well, Gail, rather than be bitter, she said, you'll be working for one of those someday if you don't get a law degree yourself. I said, well, I
Kathy
can't.
was pretty insightful
Yes.
and still is.
And I said, I can't leave like Phyllis did you know, they're not going to give me an education over at William Mitchell. They got Phyllis.
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, let me see if I can get the rules changed at Minnesota. So while she was in the provost's office, she got the rules changed so that I could go there and get a law degree while I was still working. So she came back and said, okay, you can come here, you can get your law degree. I'm sure the dean will let you into the law school, but I don't want you to be admitted by the dean. I want you to be an automatic admit, so you better do well on the LSAT.
So you
No
wanted to come
pressure.
in with your head held high, in other words.
So I sent off for like 4 copies of the old LSAT tests, and I studied them by myself and went in to take the LSAT, and everyone in the room knew each other, even though they were from different schools. And I asked someone next to me, why do you all know each other? Well, they'd all taken the Kaplan prep course.
The
And
prep
I thought,
course.
oh my God, I'm the only person in this room that didn't take a prep course. But I got a 99th percentile. Kathy was happy. And said,
So you
now
didn't have your mind cluttered up with all that stuff they imparted in that course, maybe.
Right. So I was an automatic admit. And then Kathy said, all you have to do now is be sure and make law review. I thought, geez, my parents were never like
She
this.
doesn't give up on criteria for how to excel.
So that was my next goal. I had to make law review. So those 3 years were really, we call those the lost years. My husband and I took for the 8 months of my 1L, I was on sabbatical.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point on, I would work full-time in the summers, but also take summer school classes. And I'd go to 80% time during the school year and take a full load. And so it was a tough 3 years.
80% time. That means your salary was trimmed a tiny
Yes.
bit, but I'll bet the work seemed to be
Right,
there
because
somehow.
you're right there. You're captive. I mean,
Oh,
you're
how
in your
convenient.
office. You still
yes, we
do. They
just
get all
need
the
this
work out of
done.
you. Right. So it was interesting. I loved law school. I mean, I'd been cataloging those books for so long that it all meant something to me. I wanted to talk about these things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. And when I finally graduated, got my law degree, Kathy, as a reward, let me apply for the associateship at Research Libraries Group.
Mm-hmm.
They were based in Stanford, and I got to go live out there for 6 months in Mountain View, California, which is heaven.
Nice part of the country.
Yes, and I
one
worked
gets
there.
a little nervous about the earthquakes, but
And I was there during the earthquake.
during
the
so you got to
1989
enjoy
earthquake.
what the biggie.
I was. They had an apartment for me in walking distance of Research Libraries Group, and I was walking home. Everyone else had gone home because there was a World Series between the L.A. and Oakland, I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it was
right.
a Bay Series.
And the
So everyone had
convenience
gone
of that
home.
thing happening right on national TV because
So I'm
of
all
the
by
ball
myself
game.
walking home, and I thought I was having a dizzy spell. I kind of went down on my knees. It was just awful. And then I noticed that the guy who just jogged by me was down on his knees, and all the cars had stopped. And the guy turned around and said, wow, that was some earthquake. I thought, oh, wow, I've experienced an earthquake. And I stayed up all night in my apartment listening to the shower door go boom, 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 back and forth from all the little tremors afterwards.
Yeah.
So that was exciting.
And hoping, presumably, that there wouldn't be a really big one afterwards.
Right.
You
And then
never know.
I pitched in on the Stanford campus and helped them reshelve some of the books because, of
Yeah.
course, all of the books tipped over in all the libraries. It was a mess.
Oh, I'll bet. Well, as you say, you got to experience a real California earthquake.
Yeah, that was
not
exciting.
that probably most people would envy that. But it sounds like you had an interesting time. So you were at the Research Libraries Group at that point. Can you tell me a little more about, other than the earthquake problem, more about that experience?
It was like heaven because for those people who don't know what RLG was, it was the counterpoint to OCLC, only it was for the large research libraries.
Yes.
And as the law person who was working there for 6 months, I was supposed to work with all the law library members to talk about projects and things that would be important for them, cooperative collection development, things like that. So I got to travel around and see all sorts of law libraries that I'd never seen before. Went down and saw USC in LA County and UCLA. Went out east and got to see Yale and Harvard and NYU and BU. It was just amazing. I don't remember all of the ones that I saw. And I got to talk with all of their directors. And it was just Columbia,
Columbia.
NYU. It was just fantastic. It was like a paid vacation for 6 months. Well, I got to gossip with all my fellow directors. Well, I wasn't a director yet, but all the directors and talk about library projects. That was fun.
Were you at Research Library Group when they started to broaden the criteria for membership and let schools that didn't perhaps have such extensive libraries become part of it?
Right. And eventually they did get bought by OCLC.
Yes.
Because there really wasn't, I don't think, room for both RLG and OCLC.
Yeah.
But RLG did a lot of good things. A lot of their projects were very good. And it was kind of a shame to see it all get merged together.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, as you say, there's only a finite market, and the consolidation was probably market-driven as much as anything.
But the people at RLG were so fun to work with, really exciting people.
Now, you have mentioned Phyllis and Kathy as mentors. Is there anybody else that might fit that criteria in your mind?
Those are the two people I think of as my mentors. George Grossman was at Minnesota for a while before Kathy came. And, he was good. He was very different from Kathy. So it was good to see different leadership techniques. And you take from that, take a little bit from both of them. And that was good.
Yeah. George lives in Portland, Oregon now.
He's in Portland?
Yes. He's a widower. And they had moved, after he retired, he was at Davis, moved to Ashland, Oregon, or that immediate area, southern Oregon. And then more recently, he sort of sold the house or whatever they were living in, and now is in a community in Oregon, right on the Willamette River. It's a very nice setting, where he's basically said if he develops needs, they are equipped to meet those sorts of things. So,
that's good.
So he's sort of properly positioned, at least.
Yeah, that's perfect. I have a friend on the faculty here, my best friend on the faculty, Professor Bridge. When he retires in 2 years, he's going out to Lake Oswego, which is part of Portland.
Okay, that's one of the suburbs on the east side.
Yeah, that he starts out in his own apartment, and if he needs more help.
Well, there will be not immediate neighbors, but pretty close neighbors. For whatever that's worth. Yes. Well, you left, or you completed your work with Research Library Group, and then moved back into our branch of the profession a little more directly. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you did?
Well, it was funny because I think a day or two after the earthquake, the head of the search committee here at SMU called me and asked would I like to interview at SMU for the directorship. And I just wanted out of there.
You mean you didn't tell them we're having so much fun with this shaking ground?
And Texas sounds like a good idea right now. So I said, sure. And I came here and interviewed, and it was a wonderful interview, great interview. And when I got back, I called my husband and said, what am I going to do if I get an offer? Because he'd never been to Texas, he didn't know anything about it. But he said, I owe you a move because you moved to Minnesota for me. So he said, if you decide.
A well-trained husband, if I ever heard of one.
Yes. So if you decide on SMU, that's fine with me. And that's when they made me the offer, I thought about it and I thought, this looks nice. I mean, it's a good place.
Your predecessor was Earl Borgeson?
Earl Borgeson.
Yes.
But for 2 years in between, Origene Addis was the acting director.
Okay.
It took them 2 years to find Earl's replacement.
Yeah. I remember, I guess I was on the executive board at that point. And I came here to talk to the chapter. And Earl was he was in the process of retiring. And he came to the airport and got me and showed me all over the city. And so, he was such a wonderful guy. And he said that he really enjoyed it here at SMU. And I certainly hope that was exactly your own experience.
Well, I was so lucky. My two predecessors here were Hibernia Turbeville. I don't know if you know anything about Miss Turbeville.
Oh, I knew it. Her when I was at Houston.
Fantastic. And Earl.
She was.
Earl Borgeson. And the summer before I moved here in August, but I'd already accepted the job, and ALL was in Minneapolis that summer. That's where our annual meeting was.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Turbeville was getting an award. So someone made sure, I'm not sure who it was, it made sure they introduced me to Miss Turbeville because I was going to be coming to SMU. And from that moment on, she was so wonderful to me.
She was wonderful to anybody and
She was
everybody from
just
everything I could
fantastic.
tell. Yeah, she was very kind to me in my very early days. I was involved in a project, and she let me come up here and use some of the resources
Yeah.
on Texas materials that I needed for the project.
Oh, and she had such stories.
Oh,
I mean, when they built this building, she didn't take a vacation day for 3 years.
Uh-huh.
She was here every day. And it was amazing. And the legend is that they moved a lot of the books from the old building to this building in Neiman Marcus shopping bags. I mean, she's just, and she used to talk about Melvin Belli during the Jack Ruby trial.
Yes.
Would use the law library here.
Okay.
She gave him a carol to use. Just amazing stories. She was so full of life. She loved baseball. She loved football. And she and her sister, in the last year or two, moved into an assisted living place. And so I would take her to lunch. We would go to lunch a lot because she said, "Oh, Gail, these people, all they want to talk about is their health, and I want to talk about the Rangers." You know, she was just so great.
Yeah. For those of our newer viewers who may not recognize the name Melvin Belli, he was once referred to as the King of Torts by many people. He was a
Right.
very famous and skilled and a bit controversial
Yes.
trial lawyer. I think his main office was in San Francisco.
I think so, yeah, a San Francisco lawyer.
And
yes.
I remember it was described to me. I never saw it, so I may be speaking out of tune, but he had a big window on the ground, on the sidewalk
I went by
level.
it, yes, in San
And that
Francisco.
was his ceremonial office that he had
Yeah.
all set up and complete with glasses over the book where he was supposedly had been reading the rest of the time. It was all for show.
Oh, yeah, he was a character.
But he was quite a showman. And we had in the law library, when I was basically still a student at the University of Washington, we had some sound recordings, regular 33 and a third RPM phonograph records of his lecturing on some topic or other.
Oh, wow.
That was, as I said, he was quite a showman.
Oh, yeah. And he and Miss Turbeville, I imagine, got along well.
Oh, I would imagine. She was a showman, too, in
Yeah,
her
so
own way.
between Miss Turbeville and Mr. Borgeson, it was just amazing. And once in a while, he would come, and the three of us could go out to lunch together or dinner together. It was just great. I just felt so lucky.
Yeah. Well, he was a super person, too. I mean,
He was.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't have retired when he did, in all honesty.
Maybe not. I don't. Well, was it still
I think
age
he was
based?
I think he was a little bored. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, he told me later. He said I should have kept working, Gail, but I thought it was time to retire.
Oh,
But he got bored.
so he could have apparently
Mhm.
done it because I remember for tenured faculty there was an age-based mandatory retirement for a long time, even
Right.
beyond when it had ended for most other people.
Right. I know. I don't think he had to. I think it was a
Yeah,
choice.
he was
But-
post that period. Yeah, somewhere back about that time it ended.
But he was
for
just
everybody.
great.
Yeah, he was great. Well, we've talked about how you became the director. We've talked about other aspects of it. Can you tell us a little more about your experience here at the Underwood Law Library as director?
It was all good. It really was. Trying to think how best to describe it. When I got here, it was probably one of the most exciting times for libraries.
Mhm.
It was just when computers were really becoming part of the main part of our lives.
Mhm.
I think when I got here, there was one Westlaw terminal, one Lexis terminal, and one PC for the entire student body that was here in the library for them.
Mm.
And we all had computers in the library, but we weren't using them to the extent we do now. It was just everything started. And it was obvious that we were going to have to figure out how to accommodate a whole bunch of computers as students got their own. And I remember the first bid I got for providing access to computers hardwired in the library was going to be like $800,000 or something.
Yes, the equipment was not, shall we
'Cause-
say, inexpensive in
Right,
those days.
right,
Still
and here's,
isn't,
right,
but
and here's
not
this
like
building
that.
that's all cement, so the whole idea of wiring it and everything
Yeah.
was gonna cost us so much.
Didn't have Wi-Fi yet,
And then
did we?
Wi-Fi came along.
Oh, see,
And I think,
everything.
Nova might have been the first law school to have Wi-Fi, and we might have been second or third,
Oh.
because we had to. And in fact, at first, they had to check out little Wi-Fi antennas at the desk. And
That's
they were
right.
like these little things
Plug
about the
'em
size
into
of
the
this.
side of your computer.
Yes, and so it went from there, and thank goodness. And then
Yeah.
we finally got Wi-Fi antennas in the ceiling. I remember one time our dean was giving a tour to a bunch of alums, and he's pointing to these Wi-Fi antennas, and he said they were, what did he call them? I think he called them sprinkler system. And I could tell half of the people he was talking to knew those weren't sprinklers, and I didn't want to correct him in front of anybody, but I
Did
thought,
you go
I
as
better
far
make
as
sure.
to ask them if they really knew what they were, though? They weren't sprinklers, but what were they?
So I just let that one pass.
Yeah.
But thank goodness for wireless
Yeah.
technology.
Sounds like the dean is a real quick study in terms of innovating. He might not have known what they were, but he had a name for it.
Right. And so this is a lovely library. And we were so fortunate in this room, which is the Solander room, one of our emeriti faculty, she was a First Amendment scholar. But this is her room, and the rare books from the rare book room have spilled over into this, because one of our other faculty, Joe McKnight, was an unbelievably avid rare book collector. And thank goodness, he loved having them here, and he donated the entire collection to the Underwood Law Library. But all the time he was here, the rare book room was alive. I mean, it was used. It was, you know how rare book rooms in so many law schools are just kind of
Sort of
ceremonial.
museums to
Right.
the books.
Right. A few cases of Blackstone, a few books of Blackstone, and a nice table for meetings and all that. But he used to have his classes meet in the rare book room. He'd have seminars. He would give tours. He learned how to bind and refurbish his own rare books. I mean, he was just amazing. And we were so blessed with Professor McKnight and this rare book collection. So as we got more technologically driven, I used to come up to the rare book room and remember why I became a librarian. Because you could stand in there and you can smell those old bindings, and you open those books and you can see the little marginal notes and where the book falls open from somebody who used it 300 years ago. And then you remember why you're a librarian.
Suddenly it all comes together. This
Yes.
is for real, and you're part of it, huh?
Right.
Oh, that's great. Well, it sounds like you've enjoyed your position here and all the things you've been able to do in the library, but you also are a faculty member.
Yes.
Can you talk about that aspect of the hat you wore
Yes.
around here?
The first thing I wanted to do when I got here was make sure that the library staff got more involved in teaching. So the first thing we did was establish an advanced legal research class. And I think I taught it maybe the first 2 years and then handed it off to the reference staff, because their skills are always much more up to date, I think, than the director. I was never the kind of director who worked the reference desk very much. So that was the first thing I taught. And then I got second dibs on what I think is the most interesting course in law school, which is copyright. So I got second dibs on copyright, and I've taught that. And then for, I think, maybe 6 years, I taught the Perspectives of the American Legal System, which is the mandatory course for our international and comparative LLM students when they come here. And that was fun because I got to meet students from all over. That was like a
Teaching
gift.
LLM students is its own fascination.
It is. It's high maintenance because they really, I mean, they're in your office a lot.
Yeah, well, I
but
taught
they're just
Admiralty
delightful.
for a long time at American, and I had a lot of the international students in that course. And I understand what you just
Yes.
said.
But it was so much fun. I remember one especially, I was teaching that course during 9/11, when 9/11 took place. And at that point we had maybe a quarter of the students. We used to have anywhere from 40 to 60 students a year. And maybe a quarter of them that year were from the Middle East. And I was so worried that they would be people would be mean to them because of 9/11.
Yeah.
And so, we spent almost an entire class just talking about things as a group. But that was a very friendly group, and I think they all kind of stuck together, and they all kind of protected
bonded,
the
I
Middle
guess.
Eastern students,
Yeah.
so no one ever got hurt.
Oh, that was good because,
I was worried about them.
yeah. I mean, even today with this terrorist group and basically operating out of Syria and other
Right.
places, there's been a recent backlash against people from that part of the world in some
Right.
circles here in the United States. It's so, 9/11 was even scarier.
Yes. But the students I met there, I mean, they're just amazing people.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like it was interesting. So you taught a bit.
Mhm.
Now, did you get involved in governance here in the law school or even the broader institution? I mean, as a faculty member, you sure
Well,
you
and
voted
you-
down then, but
And I'm sure you know from experience that the faculty always likes the librarian to be on a bunch of committees. I think
absolutely,
I'm never sure
because
whether
librarians
I like to think it's because
have
they
the
admire us.
characteristic of saying yes when asked,
That's right. They like
and
to.
they're usually pretty good at it.
That's right. So yes, I served on the executive committee 2 or 3 times. I was on the dean search committee that came up with the dean that we hired in the late 90s. Curriculum committee, I chaired the curriculum committee for a little bit. I think they always rely on the director for a lot of committee work.
Mhm.
And campus-wide, the libraries here have always gotten along very well.
Good.
Kathy, that was one of the things Kathy told me, that you always need to make sure you get along well with the other libraries on
Yeah.
campus. Because, there's a temptation to come and kind of thumb your nose at them. We're autonomous. We report to the law
Yeah,
school.
and
We can
vice
do what we
versa,
want.
perhaps, if you do that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so we've always gotten along very well here on campus.
Mhm. Earlier you mentioned your work with the Research Libraries Group, which was essentially like OCLC. Well, we had OCLC on the campus where I was,
Yeah.
but in order to get access to it, we had to work with the university library because
Yeah.
they had the equipment and for a while. So, as you say, it helps to be on better terms.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
And I know neither of the libraries I've been at, the library systems, I've never been fortunate to have Innovative, which is what all my colleagues liked, which was supposed to be the system that was so easy for law libraries.
Yeah.
I always cooperated with whatever system the main campus had, Minnesota and here.
Yeah.
And
Would
it's
they
worked out
have
fine.
notice or something for? Or
Had noticed that at Minnesota, and
Yeah.
then I don't even remember what we've got here
Yeah.
anymore. What it's
Oh,
called.
they changed.
They
of
changed
course.
them often now.
Notice was the one that the university libraries shared
Right.
in Washington D.C., but the law libraries we all had Innovative.
Innovative. See,
Yeah.
you got the good one.
And then we originally used to link to each other by telephone. You'd go to the terminal and push. You wanted to check the holdings, say at George Washington, and it would telephone their catalog automatically.
I know.
You'd wait for it to, and wait and wait and wait for it to go through, and it would then call up the record, and you could see,
Yeah.
what they had, the same title or whatever.
There was a time all I ever wanted was to be an innovative library, and never got that.
Oh, did we think we died and gone right to heaven with this technology?
Yeah, it was just
And we
amazing.
had, in a sense, but you could do it through the larger system too, I'm sure. But as you say, it's always something you could wish for that you
That's
may
right.
not get. Keeps life interesting.
Yes, it does. And here on campus, there are only 2 autonomous libraries, the theology library and the law library, and then everything else is run by university libraries. I remember there's a cute story with Origene Addis, the associate director, who was the acting director right before I came here.
Mhm.
She's a Texan by birth. And right after I got here, we went to a meeting of the libraries across campus, because they were talking about where to put the barcodes.
Mhm.
Well, we all wanted to put the barcodes in the same place. They wanted theirs on the inside so they could buy cheaper barcodes. We wanted them on the outside so we could do an inventory if we wanted,
Sure,
through the
walk
stacks.
down the stacks and it's a little
Went on
thing.
and on. And finally at the end I said something about, you guys can do whatever you want. We're going to put them on the outside. And we left. And on the way back across campus, Laura Jean says, Gail, where you said you guys can do whatever you want. She says, that's where y'all comes in really handy. And she's right. Y'all just kind of softens it all.
Yeah.
That's the way they are down
The
here.
Southern way of addressing other
So
people.
I took that
It's
to
sort of a
heart.
positive way, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or referring to him, I remember another term in Texas was a good old boy,
Yes.
which I think women used.
Yes.
very-
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you were in if you were one of those.
That's right.
Oh, that's sort of funny. Now, you have reached out beyond the university and been involved in some other organizations in various ways. I'm thinking of the Board of Advisors to the University of North Texas School of Library and Information Science. And can you talk about sort of that aspect and perhaps things of that sort that you may have dabbled in along the way?
When I first came here, I taught law librarianship first at Texas Women's University, which is up in Denton,
Mm-hmm.
and then at University of North Texas Library School up in Denton.
That's in Denton, too. They're
Yes.
both there.
Oh, and driving to Denton from Dallas, the first time I got on that freeway, they're going 80 miles an hour. I was going 80 miles an hour, and there's still 18-wheelers are pulling up behind me honking.
Yeah.
I mean, the freeway, it's like Death Valley. But it was the most exciting. I swear to day, if I have high blood pressure, it's got to be from those drives up. They were all evening courses, of
Well,
course.
I
so it
hate
was
to
in the dark,
disillusion
too.
you, but I made the same drive the other evening, and we weren't able to get up past about
No,
40.
because they're all doing.
It's called the
they're
rush
doing-
hour.
Yes, but that was scary. But I enjoyed teaching law librarianship, of course, and that's when they asked me to be on the board. And then after that, I've been fairly active in ALL. None of the big posts, but I've been on committees. And then I was so flabbergasted one day. I was sitting at my desk, must have been 2003, and I got a phone call and it said they were calling from the White House. And I thought,
Oh,
one of our grads is going to be a U.S. attorney. Because, we've all had those kind of phone calls.
Yeah.
Can you give us information about your graduate? And now they wanted information about me because...
you're going to be the U.S. attorney?
No, because President Bush was making nominations to the National Museum and Library Services Board.
Okay.
Which I got online, of course. I looked up the National
Well,
Museum
find out what it
Library
is.
Services Board, and they wanted information from me. I don't even know how they got my name. I know Laura Bush went here, and perhaps something.
You don't
They wanted
know
to get somebody from SMU.
who she
I don't
might
know.
have talked to and advised
But-
her husband.
And that was, it took maybe a year, the whole process, because he has to send you your nomination to the Senate. You have to fill out all these
Oh, you're glad you didn't go
forms.
up this year. I mean, they're still
Oh,
fighting over
I know.
everything.
You have to fill out all these forms. Got visited by an FBI agent. His first question was, have you had any contact with anyone outside of the United States? Well, I was teaching this course to the LLMs. I said, oh, yes, about 60 of them every week.
Oh, and probably jotted that down in his thing and said, I'll tell the director all about that.
So that was, and then when I finally got approved, that was a good experience. I mean, it was my first experience with museums, and the other librarians on the committee were just fantastic. I was the only law librarian, but they were from all different kinds of libraries, just wonderful people. And they're giving out grants and doing wonderful things, and it was just exciting. I really liked that, and giving out awards every year.
That must have been pleasant. I mean, just to watch the faces of the people who received them.
It was because, and the applications from the libraries who wanted awards, I mean, these were public libraries who were doing fantastic things with kids. The stuff the reason I became a librarian, that who were getting them to, reading hours, storytelling
Right,
hours.
you started
how
off
many
in the
books can you
school
read this
setting
summer?
and not the
Yeah.
law school setting.
Right, and so it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, so you came full circle, sort of.
Well, at my retirement party, I told the faculty, here I plan to spend my life working with small children, and instead I worked with law faculty. Not that big a difference.
Yes, and I won't clip this out either. If they see it and are offended, we'll both be in trouble. Who cares?
They laughed.
Yeah. Well, this sort of brings me around to a question I usually pose early on, but didn't, and that is you've alluded to the fact of being retired. I had mentioned it in the introduction, as my former deputy used to call this, and still does, the membership in the Saturday morning, every day is Saturday morning club. do you have any particular hobbies or other pursuits, passions that help occupy time now that you have a bit more on available? Maybe?
Well, I'm lucky that my husband and I are both retired.
Mm-hmm.
We sold our home to SMU because we lived right near campus, and now we live in a high-rise condominium, not far, about 10 minutes from here.
So you don't have to cut the lawn and
So
all that
there's
sort
none
of
of that
thing?
stuff to bother with.
Yeah.
Exercise room, bridge club, Bible study. I mean, lots of stuff to do with the
Everything you
people
want,
who
huh?
live there.
Yeah.
And I can read all I want, which is like heaven on earth.
Mhm.
And of course, oddly enough, it must be about 2 years ago now, I was approached by UNT Dallas, which is a new university campus to downtown Dallas that was starting a law school.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been consulting with UNT Dallas Law School, who will be visited by a site team for the first time January 31st
Mm-hmm.
of 2016. I'm trying to help them get ready for their first inspection.
Yeah. Well,
Hope
they're
they
going to get a
accredited.
visit tomorrow too by me. In
Oh, you're gonna
connection
go
with this? Yes.
Well, delightful people down there. I mean, just delightful. And the students are so nice.
Mhm.
And, you know, I don't feel at all disloyal because they're a totally different kind of law school than SMU.
Oh.
And as a product of public education, from kindergarten through 3 college degrees,
Mhm.
I like the idea of a public law school,
Yeah.
a little more affordable, and being right downtown and
Mhm.
serving a different clientele and turning out different kinds of lawyers, I think, than SMU turns out for the most part. And so it's been fun working with them.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that I'm all disloyal or anything like that. It's just been fun.
Yeah. Well, you also have another state-supported law school in the sort of immediate area of Dallas and Fort Worth, or an immediate area, and that's Texas A&M.
Right,
And
which
I'm gonna
just
be
became
chatting
part of
with
it.
some of them tomorrow too.
Oh, you're going to...
Yeah.
Who you going to talk to, Susan Phillips?
Yes,
Oh.
and Wes Cochran.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be
At
interesting.
A&M, which is the old Texas Wesleyan
Yes.
School of Law.
I mean, it started out as DFW School of Law, and it was
Mhm.
here right near the airport. Then it went to Texas Wesleyan over in Fort Worth, still private. And then 2 or 3 years ago, got bought by A&M. Boy, A&M is really going to make a good law school out of that.
Yeah. Well, from what I've just in exchanges of messages and so on, I've been hearing from them that the tremendous changes in the new focus on really high-end kind of academic
Right.
achievements and so on.
Right. And I know that's kind of lit a fire under the faculty here, too. I know, you know, a little more
Well,
competition than
it
they're
would
used
be
to.
a little more competition for SMU.
Yeah. I
than,
mean, SMU's had it really good all
that
this
model
time.
would be, yeah. Well, you've had competition, but it hasn't been exactly on your doorstep
Right.
relatively. I mean, you've got
Right.
UT and, up north, the schools in places like Oklahoma,
Right.
but, this will be a little closer at hand.
But the consulting downtown really stems from another part of what's been rewarding about my career
Mhm.
was the site visit teams over the
Yeah.
years. I think that's the best thing in the world to get involved in. No matter what school you go to, even if it's a brand new one, just starting to apply for accreditation, you get an idea. You get some good ideas. They do something
I used
different.
to come back and say I was stealing this and that, and I was unabashed about it.
I know. And my staff used to hate when I came back. Oh God, what's she going to make us do now? But you do. You come back with neat ideas,
Yeah.
or I would even talk about them at the faculty meetings. I just went to this law school, and they do specializations, and it's worked out so well for their students. Blah blah blah. And we'd have a big discussion about it at the faculty meeting.
Yeah.
That was a very valuable part of being a director.
Well, I had another mentor, my first boss after I had all my academic credentials. That was Al Coco.
Oh,
Al used to say, he didn't care who thought up the good ideas. If we tried them and they worked, we all got our fair
Right.
share of the credit. Or what he also said, if it didn't work, the blame.
right.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Well, sort of Gail Daly, on that, we're probably nearing the end of today's conversation, but it's customary to ask if there's anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up.
Back to the idea of the Texas libraries and the Texas
Mhm.
community. There is a the directors of the Texas Law Libraries have always had an annual meeting, they get together. When I first came here, we used to go places and stay overnight and everything. And then it just changed to coming to someone's law school for a day. But that's been so good. And you know, some of the Texas law librarians have been very famous. You got Roy Mirsky and people like that.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the best parts too, I think, about being down here in SMU. I didn't know Mirsky very well before all that. And in this, I don't know, you might want to edit this out, but at one of our meetings was when we were frustrated sometimes with some things that were going on with ALL, was when Roy got us to start the Society of Academic Law Library Directors, which was, a voice that really spoke for academic directors. And that was fun. It was good to work with Roy, and he had good ideas, and that surprised me, but it was rewarding.
I had the greatest respect for him, and I owed him because when I was again newly minted and working in the estate, he was very kind and arranged for an opportunity to help launch my career in a way. And so I always respected the man. He was a lot of fun to talk to.
He was. I mean, think of the people whose careers. I mean, that's why Kathy Price is a lot like Roy.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate to have Kathy in my life at the time that you probably had Roy, but Kathy has launched so many people. And,
she has.
And I think she must look back and think she did a good job, and I bet Roy did too.
Yeah. And she told you when you were going to, first you should be a law student, then you should be on law review. Did she tell you should be the editor as well? Because you were.
Yes. Yeah, I told you, my mom and dad never pushed me like Kathy did.
Yeah. Well, they're special people, and they're both in that category.
They are.
In my opinion.
And I think that's how we've been blessed in law librarianship with unbelievable people. I just think of people like Roger Jacobs and the people back then. I think of.
Yeah. Well, even
amazing
today,
people.
I mean, I'm going around doing these things and these sessions and meeting, of course, seeing a lot of old friends, but I'm also meeting an awful lot of new ones.
That's good.
We've got some real talented people who've come into our field recently. And the future, I think, looks rosy for law librarians.
Did you see where they're thinking of changing the name?
Yes, but the reality is librarians, to many people, just suggest older style technology called books. And, maybe we ought to at least give it a fair hearing.
Right, and it is information, I was sent, ALS sent me to Charleston when they were first getting accredited. And the site visit team had reported back very positively. But ALS, I think, was worried because it was an electronic library.
Yeah.
So I was sent down as a special fact finder to Charleston. Does it really work without books? And I think I was there for 2 days. To this day, I don't know anything about Charleston because I interviewed like 52 people in 2 days. And it worked. I mean, it really worked. The faculty, every faculty member I talked to knew exactly what databases were best for him and how he accessed them when he was over in Europe and what she needed for this. And it was an amazing experience, and that's when I knew things were changing.
Yeah. Well, actually, that wasn't the first model law school that was going to have a library that had things or basically consisted of everything except books. Back in the early 70s, the Antioch University in Ohio started a law school in Washington, D.C. And
Really?
George Strait, who had been the reference librarian for many years at Harvard, was recruited to go down there and be their first librarian, a founding librarian, and he did. And one of his, my boss at the time, Art Charpentier, was the library consultant. And the deans at the time had figured it out that if everything should be on microfiche. And so they would have a library solely of microfiche. And Art and George disabused them of that being quite the idea that they thought it was. But, so it turned out that they did build a much more traditional library.
But there was a time that I think people thought that was the way, microfiche and microfilm.
Yeah.
Because when Minnesota moved from its old building on one bank of the Mississippi back to over to the new building on the other bank, and George Grossman was our director. There was a big microfiche room.
Well, we had that too, but it was stuff that I used to tell the faculty, well, you can still go down to the Library of Congress and get it there if you want to. It'll be in paper. I can't get that for you, but I can give you this this funny stuff that no one wants to use, but they did use it.
Right. Remember micro cards that were even
Oh,
cards, it wasn't
heavens,
all
yes,
fiche.
where you had a reflected image, and talk about your eyes wearing out.
Oh, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah. Well, we've had an interesting ride, you and I. I
Yeah,
can tell
we
that
really
just
have.
talking. Yeah, we've seen a lot, but there's activity and change and innovation in our profession now that's probably every bit as scary for some of the people, but every bit as exciting for everybody.
Well, I worry now that a library this size, it's almost like, it almost makes things more difficult than easy. It's almost easier for those newer libraries that don't have a collection this size. You don't know what to do with it. You hate to have everyone get rid of their collections.
And it's so terribly expensive to produce the space needed to house
Right.
hundreds of thousands of book volumes.
And I know other departments in the law school have their eyes on space over here, and that's why I think it was probably a good time
you
for me
mean
to
that wasn't
retire.
unique to some other places? You have it too,
No.
huh?
So I thought it was probably a good time for me to retire. I think I retired. I mean, I have nothing but good thoughts about my career. I think it was the very, very best times. Not that there aren't going to be good times, but for me, they were the best times, and I left right at the right time.
Yeah. I have heard some current librarians describe the fact that our generation was so fortunate because we came at the tip-top time to be a law librarian.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's true. I think in a few years they look back and discover that there was still a lot of future ahead. But,
Oh yeah, it's just different from ours.
yeah, it is different. And that's certainly so it is.
Right.
I mean, what we did in some ways, dealing with the beginnings of the digital stuff, the microfilms,
Closing the
the
card catalogs.
huge adding the international components to our collection, compared to our predecessors, ours were different and probably scary potentially times too for a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
people.
Yeah, I think I started out filing catalog cards.
Yeah.
Boy, people won't even know what you're talking about anymore.
Catalog cards? What's that? Well, it used to go in a
File
drawer
above
and
the
you
rod
pull it
and
out
someone would
and
come
hunt
through
through it
and
with your
check it.
fingers
Yeah.
until you found the item you needed and
Yeah,
looked it
that's
up and then
amazing.
got a piece of paper on the side and jotted down the call number. And went to the shelves if they were open, or you had the stack attendants go, and
Yeah, it was
hopefully they'd find the volume you needed, because if they didn't, there was no backup.
great. No, but it's been a good ride. It's been very good.
Yeah. Well, maybe on that, Gail Daly, I should thank you for being part of today's conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating for me. I think you've offered insights and information that will be very interesting to the people who use this collection to find out what it was we did for a living and how we went about it as law librarians in our era.
Thank you.
And I'm thanking you, of course, not only on my own behalf, because I get to go around and do this interview session, but on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Kodek, and of course Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor of putting together this oral history of law librarianship.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.